Hi, I'm Matt Nathan from the Freedom for Ocalan campaign. This is the first of what we hope will be semi-regular programmes where we look at the current events and news coming out of the Middle East, and we give you all the background information and context that you need. The Freedom for Ocalan campaign is a trade union campaign that is rooted in the trade union traditions of international solidarity. And international solidarity is born out of understanding. So that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to give you the news and give you the information you need that's behind that news. If you want to support this, then obviously you can like this video and please subscribe to our channel, but also you can follow us on Twitter, which is, our handle is @OcalanFree. If you want to directly support the creation of this content, we have a Patreon that you can go to, which is patreon.com/Freedom for Ocalan, and for as little as £1 per month, you can support the creation of videos and podcasts just like this. If you want to go that extra step and you want to become involved with the campaign, you can go to our website, www.freedomforocalan.org, and you can affiliate as either an individual or a trade union branch or meeting or committee or district. Without further ado, I'd like to bring in my guest for this episode, which is Elif Sarican. Elif, welcome.
Hi, Matt. Thank you for having me.
So Elif is, as well as an advisor to the campaign, Elif is also the co-chair for the UK Kurdish Assembly. Recently elected. Congratulations, Elif.
Thank you very much.
It might be useful if you just sort of explain for some of the people watching what the Kurdish Assembly is, what it does, and what your role involves.
So the Kurdish People's Assembly in the UK is part of what we call a confederal structure that also brings together actually tens of Kurdish assemblies all across Europe and makes up the Europe Kurdish People's Assembly. So the way it works locally is that there's local assemblies which also have committees for various areas, especially in terms of the needs of our community where we are. And the way we structure and organize this work that we do with and for our community, so it's also kind of has a dual characteristic in that sense, is we have committees for various areas, and all of these committees also have like levels of autonomy, but also a strong sense of coordination, which then makes up a confederal and, eventually, in the case of particularly the Middle East, a federal structure of some sort as well. Now, one of the most important aspects of the Kurdish Assembly is its co-chair structure. So a man and a woman is elected to chair equally every structure that we have, and especially the woman co-chair is selected and therefore, in some ways, therefore then appointed to what we call a general structure by the autonomous women structure. So this is, of course, the very crucial aspect of the institutionalization of women's liberation, and therefore women's equal, social and political participation in every aspect of life and society. It serves many areas of life for particularly the community and the society it's serving. Of course, in Europe, it looks slightly different to what it would look like in, say, northern Syria. But it's also the most crucial things that always exist are, particularly social committees. We have peace and reconciliation committees. We have strategic relations committees and other needs that there may be. We also have autonomous structures for women and autonomous structures for youth who therefore can organize themselves autonomously but come together in this coordinated confederal way.
And that enfranchisement of women, of young people, of everybody that's central to the ideology of Öcalan and the political project, isn't it?
Certainly, yeah. I mean, the analysis of Öcalan, essentially the foundations of what we call capitalism. Öcalan calls it capitalist modernity because capitalism is not just a mere economic structure, but also, especially in the way we see it now, it basically is I suppose a principle, but also a ideology that most of civilization organized on. And the key analysis is that women constitute the first colony in Öcalan's analysis, and therefore the enslavement of women is what created the foundations for the formation of the first state, and therefore in sequence, consequently, the nation state and capitalism and so on and so forth. So therefore, if we are to liberate society, Öcalan says a society cannot be free without women's liberation. So to say, you basically can't address an issue without addressing the foundation of it. In some ways, it's actually quite a basic principle. Whatever you're trying to solve, you can't solve it without addressing the very foundations and the fundamental reasons for why it exists in the first place. And therefore, if we're trying to address a civilizational issue, we can't address it in any meaningful way without understanding the foundations of how we got here.
So I guess there are quite powerful parallels then between Öcalan's thoughts and ideology and political philosophy of that decolonizing process has to begin with that injustice, addressing that foundational injustice of patriarchy and the oppression of women. But our campaign was founded really on the idea that to resolve a lot of the problems that we're seeing, not just in filling in the world, but particularly in the Middle Eastern region, that has to begin with a peace process that starts with resolving a foundational injustice, which is the imprisonment of Öcalan. So moving on to the first sort of news item that I want to discuss with you this evening, and this is actually relates to Rojava, which is obviously the society, the political system in north and east Syria that is based on the ideas of Öcalan. And this is a report, a new piece of research that's come from the Rojava Information Center, and it's a database that they've constructed on former ISIS fighters. And obviously the Kurdish people, the Kurdish people's movement were instrumental. They were the people on the ground that defeated ISIS. So this is a really, really critical piece of work. And I just want to just before we go into sort of discussing it a little bit, I just want to kind of read this from the report, from the introduction from the report. And it says, it's 1 year since Turkey launched its devastating Peace Spring operation, greenlit by Donald Trump and primarily targeting the Kurds in north and east Syria. The invasion displaced an initial wave of 200,000 internally displaced persons, including most of the Kurdish and all of the local Yazidi and Christian minorities, plus large numbers of Arabs. Since then, Turkey has been installing Sunni Arab militias in this formerly diverse, tolerant and secular region, responsible for a wide range of war crimes and atrocities against the civilian population. This is according to the UN. Now, this Rojava Information Center report reveals the identities of over 40 former ISIS members being sheltered, funded, and protected by Turkey in the occupied region. The report reveals that many ISIS commanders, fighters, and emirs are now on the Turkish payroll, using Turkish-issued ID cards and receiving commands from Turkish intelligence as part of the Turkish-controlled Syrian National Army. So this is really, this is quite shocking stuff if you don't know the background to this, but perhaps you could tell us the background to this and why perhaps if you know a little bit more, this isn't too shocking.
Yeah, I think the report put together by the Rojava Information Center is a quite crucial bit of independent information and independent research. And I think, unfortunately, we don't get that very often. especially information and research that is quite ideologically independent as well. But unfortunately, you're right, Matt, it's not very shocking to see this, especially because from the very beginning of the way essentially the Rojava political project and the social project was heard by the world was during the resistance of Kobane. This historic resistance where the tide was turned, and therefore the pushback and the territorial defeat, the territorial defeat of ISIS very much began in favor of the people of north and east Syria. Now, during this time, Erdogan, who at the time was the president of Turkey before the change in constitution, he would make televised statements almost on a daily basis, essentially in some ways issuing, what is called, essentially issuing fatwas, which are like kind of like religious kind of statements in some way, talking about how Kobane was about to fall. And, was championing the potential of Kobane falling to the hands of ISIS, the so-called Islamic State, all the while allowing ISIS fighters to travel freely through the border of Turkey. So from Syria to Turkey, especially wounded ISIS fighters to be treated on border hospitals, particularly through the border area, near Kobane, so around Kilis, a city called Kilis. And they would go in, they would be treated into hospitals in Turkey, and also therefore be allowed to travel back into Syria to continue fighting against the YPG and the YPJ. Now, also while this was happening, there was then proof and documentation of the Turkish state buying trucks of oil, ISIS oil. And this was at a time where they had already sieged places like Mosul and Raqqa, and also therefore had access to large oil reserves, the so-called Islamic State. And actually one of the biggest and oldest newspapers in Turkey, which is a Turkish Republican newspaper, the editor-in-chief of that newspaper was forced into exile because his newspaper reported CCTV, aerial footage of ISIS oil trucks going into Turkey. He consequently had a court case, was almost imprisoned, and then was forced into exile. And now he, of course, can't return to Turkey. So all of this has been quite widely reported for a long time, but for some reason in the international arena, it's not picked up. And Erdogan, particularly with his blackmailing of Europe to keep refugees out of Europe, he's been able to get away with a lot of this. And I think this is a very crucial aspect to talk about. Sometimes in our movements, particularly, in progressive movements on the left and so on, there's this sentiment that anything that's anti-America or seemingly anti-America is good for us. But people don't realize that the biggest NATO military base outside of US soil is in the south of Turkey. So Turkey is very much an imperial NATO state, and therefore, invading these areas, supporting forces like ISIS, and now, of course, other, funding and supporting and training other jihadi militias and units to crush one of the most progressive projects, revolutionary projects of our time. And I think people don't understand the magnitude of what this means for people who believe in a better future, because it's not just about Kurdistan, it's not just about the Kurdish people, it's not just about northern Syria. It's about if, as we speak, a revolutionary, a progressive project like Rojava, now officially called the Autonomous Administration of Northern and Eastern Syria, can be crushed, then what kind of future are we going towards? And I think it's important to understand that. And yeah, as we said, unfortunately, it's not a shock. these reports. It has been widely reported, particularly in smaller media outlets for a very long time. But I'm very glad this independent report is out there.
And you mentioned there as well that, I mean, just moving on to another important story. I think there was you mentioned the arrest of the journalist the exile of the journalist who had reported the indisputable evidence of Turkey buying oil from ISIS or funding ISIS through oil sales. There's another story. This is from a couple of weeks ago, so the 5th of October. So this is police in the Turkish province of Van raided the local offices of the Mesopotamia Agency and the houses of 4 journalists. And this resulted in the detention of a number of journalists. And these were journalists who had reported on essentially Turkey torturing civilians. So it was these are human rights abuses. These are 2 men who were 2 civilians who were thrown from helicopters. Now, I think there's 2 reasons why this is an important story. Obviously, it's another time that Turkey has specifically, the Turkish state has specifically targeted journalists, but also anyone who's watching this who's from the UK trade union movement, they will probably be intimately familiar with the huge action of solidarity in the Glasgow trade unionists when they refused to fix planes that were going to be used for the so-called death flights in Chile. And obviously one of the huge atrocities of Pinochet's government was throwing enemies of the regime, trade unionists, activists, socialists, civil rights campaigners from helicopters. But this isn't something that's happened 50 years ago. It's not something that's part of history. This is something that's happening now in a country that it's part of the Council of Europe. As you say, it's a NATO power. This is really shocking stuff. I mean, what are we supposed to make of this? That Turkey is allowed to get away with throwing civilians from helicopters?
I mean, this is the thing. These, again, a lot of what we will probably speak about in this episode, but also in future episodes that you put out there, Matt, is that none of this is unusual for the Turkish state. The 100-year history of the Turkish Republic is quite unfortunately riddled with massacres, with genocide, from the Armenian genocide, which created the foundation of the Turkish Republic, to many consequent massacres like the Dersim massacre, the Marash massacre, the Sivas massacre, and of course, like in last years, where tens of civilians were burnt alive in basements, to a massacre that is called Roboski. Now, we don't have time to go into the details of these massacres, although it may be useful to do so at some point because many people don't know the history. But I think one thing is to be understood is that oppressors and essentially fascists and fascism take great example from each other in terms of methods of oppression and suppression and massacre and torture and so on. So, Hitler famously said that him and Mussolini are students of Atatürk. Now, when we can talk about, and he says, who now speaks about the Armenian genocide? And this is actually, this is quite important to reference, especially now at the moment about what's going on between Armenia and Azerbaijan. But of course, that would require a necessary and meaningful focus. But what I'm trying to say is these are nothing new. And Turkey, as many people will probably know, is the largest imprisoner of journalists in the world. As in, it has more journalists imprisoned than the rest of the world put together. And I feel like that the weight of that being put out there needs to be understood. And therefore, especially since 2016, after the attempted coup in Turkey, whatever we may make of that, that was a perfect opportunity for Erdogan to crucially make sure that there is no independent media left in Turkey. Because reporting these atrocities means, of course, creating and informing an opposition that actually already exists, but is being starved more and more. What we can call in Turkey right now is there's a political genocide that's been happening. There's massacres, constant massacres, and actually, the arrests of the Mesopotamia journalists. And in that space, so literally only in the last few weeks, there's been other raids. The Diyarbakir HDP office was raided just the other day. And, many activists and officials and members of the HDP are arrested on a daily basis. So I
wanted to talk about that, actually. That's really important, because obviously we've talked about suppression of a free press, but you talked about there sort of briefly touching on there is any sort of attempt at formulating a progressive politics. And obviously HDP, for people who don't know, is the progressive party in Turkey. And since November 2016, according to the latest available data, obviously, of course, former co-chair Selahattin Demirtas and Figen Yüksekdag are both currently imprisoned, but there are at least 30 former HDP officials, even though HDP gained 65 of over 1,000 municipalities in the local elections held last March. 6 mayor-elects were prohibited from taking office. According to data from HDP, there's 47 of the 59 mayors permitted to take office have been dismissed and then replaced with trustees appointed by the Justice and Development Party, AKP, or Erdogan's party. Sorry to interrupt you. I just wanted to provide that context there.
Of course, no, it's really important. And just also to add a point to that is these official figures, although they, will sound grave and heinous to anyone who hears them, are incomplete in a way that the official figures don't recognize the co-mayorship that the HDP institutes. So like the co-mayors that are officially not allowed to take office in an official way and therefore not recognized by the Turkish state when they are sharing an office with another co-mayor are not included in these official figures. So,
double those figures then, effectively.
It's effectively double those figures, yeah. So, I think that there it's like talking about the municipalities rather than the individual mayors. So in some ways it's still accurate, but I think to understand how grave it is, it's also important to understand that, one of the systems that the HDP tries to implement is a co-mayorship, which, when we mentioned the Kurdish People's Assembly, it's a similar system. And therefore, again, one of the most progressive ways to, implement local democracy is also starved by the Turkish state and the Erdogan government.
And so all of this is kind of useful context, I think, for lots of people, probably people who don't necessarily, and maybe forgivably, people in this country don't pay attention to Turkish politics, but they may well have noticed increasing belligerence in the Eastern Mediterranean. You've got all this sort of provocation between Turkey, and obviously this is a long-standing belligerence from Turkey against Greece about oil and gas supplies in the Eastern Mediterranean. You've got, of course, the ongoing situation in Libya, which arguably is connected, because to an extent that's about connecting gas supplies up and all the rest of it. But we talked about it briefly before. I want to look at now. So this is from France 24, and this is a statement quite a shocking statement from the Armenian president. Obviously, there is currently a conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan over the disputed Nagorno-Karabakh region. And the Armenian president has publicly stated that Turkey has a completely destructive role in this conflict. Now, obviously, at time of recording this, there is currently, as I understand it, and it was negotiated yesterday, there was a ceasefire. There have been 2 previous ceasefires which have collapsed, but currently there is a ceasefire. But obviously there are reports that that Turkey is taking mercenaries. The people we talked about right at the beginning of this conversation, the former ISIS fighters, and it is putting them into Azerbaijan. So it seems that there's a huge amount of, almost everywhere that borders Turkey, Turkey is either involved in wars or proxy wars or is belligerent in some way. Could you maybe perhaps give some context to that?
So I think one of the crucial campaign promises that Erdogan had and the AKP party had, when they were coming into office now, almost 2 decades ago, was that the promise was 0 problems at home, 0 problems with neighbors. Now, he's failed on all of those promises. One of the promises at the time, the first few years of the AKP government, was supposedly this attempt to have 0 problems with their neighbors. Of course, many factors, including a deeply democratic and revolutionary project, started taking place on their border, which it meant 0 problems as long as they are the way that we are. And this is evidently what the case is. So therefore, at this, as we speak right now, the Turkish state and therefore the Erdogan government has problems with every single bordering neighbor of Turkey. And we make no mistake that the Turkish state project right now, headed by Erdogan, is a colonial expansion project. And therefore, strategically, the Eastern Mediterranean and Libya, and of course, the invasion of northern Syria, the fueling of conflict with Armenia through Azerbaijan, and the issues with Greece and so on and so forth. These are all crucial to its colonial expansion project. And now, also tied to that is that the economy of Turkey has been on the verge of collapse for a very long time. Now, for some reason, we could go into like the economics aspect of it, but for some reason, the economy is periodically propped up by various powers, but it is on the verge of collapse and has been for a very long time. And so it also needs to, as many, again, colonial states do, and states with ambitions to expand territory, either physical and literal territory or territorial influence, is that it also needs to be able to sell arms. Now, right now, the Turkish state is trying to become more and more in the business of manufacturing arms, particularly in the way that it's been trying to buy technologies and so on. That's been one of the major kind of like tensions it's had with the US, with like the S-400, with Russia and so on and so forth. So it's also one of the motivations of Erdogan is to be able to sell arms to Azerbaijan. And of course, it's in some ways, it's like, killing 2 birds with 1 stone, where it means that somehow it's, Armenia is being being pulled into conflict in some ways by Azerbaijan, but also it gets to sell arms to Azerbaijan as well. And also, therefore, it right now, because of the funding and the training of many of these mercenaries in Syria, they can move them around in any way. Because also, unfortunately, these people have no other opportunities as well. They will very happily take a wage from the Turkish state. And so I think it's important to understand this. Erdogan, I would pay attention to the way Erdogan speaks about sequences of events that he thinks will unfold, especially in the next few years. He speaks a lot about 2023, which will be exactly 100 years after the formation of the formation of the Turkish Republic, and therefore 100 years after the Sykes-Picot Agreement. And again, potentially a change in that. He references a lot anyone who's able to follow Turkish media. Of course, it's in Turkish, so it will be difficult to follow if one doesn't speak the language. But there's a lot of old Ottoman style maps that are circulating on Turkish media where they reference something called the Misaki Milli, which means essentially the National Pact. And it's one of the last agreements made by the Ottoman Assembly that says that the modern Turkish Republic should include northern Syria and parts of Iraq all the way down to Mosul. So we shouldn't be surprised if Erdogan and therefore the Turkish state is also on a mission to literally and physically expand territory, but also to be able to expand territory, you also need to be able to have territorial influence in the surrounding region as well. So I think it's quite basic to explain it in terms of it is quite a colonial expansion project in terms of influence, but also, literal territory as well.
And I guess we see that in the language that Erdogan's very recently used. We got to sort of look at this language in the context of everything we talked about. This report from the Roger Information Centre about literally who is the leading edge of this military force in northern Syria that is de facto fighting for Turkey, i.e., ex-ISIS combatants. And Erdogan he's delivered these remarks at the 7th. It's called the Ordinary Provincial Congress of the Justice and Development Party. So I'm assuming that's their kind of annual conference. And he said, recently we have seen that the efforts of a new terrorist formation near the Iraqi border in Syria have been accelerated. Let me say this more clearly. There is an effort to establish a terror state there. I mean, he's principally talking about, am I right in thinking these are mostly Yazidi refugees?
For him, any presence, firstly, outside of his influence is, of course, this is the issue about, we've spoken about this before as well. This is the issue also about the ideological use of the language of the global war on terror. And we can quite comfortably say that the ideological use of the global war on terror has really not done much to stop actual terror, especially against the people of the very region across the Middle East in general. So any presence or any formation outside of, in this case, Erdogan's influence is he is able to quite easily pull it into the framework of what he would call terror and terrorism.
So he's justifying his own the belligerence of the project with this accusation of terrorism that's entirely undeserved. But
yeah, I mean, he calls the very people who territorially defeated ISIS, the ISIS that was, obviously was engaged in mass public beheadings, the kidnap of thousands of Yazidi women, whom they sold as sex slaves again on public markets. He called the people who territorially defeated these people, so ISIS, and liberated mass parts of northern Syria, and not just Kurdish areas. It's Raqqa is a majority Arab area of Syria, but so therefore it wasn't about Kurdishness or the Kurdish people. It was about territorially ridding this region, a region that the Syrian Democratic Forces and of course the Autonomous Administration of Northeastern Syria deeply care about. It was a liberation also of done with care, and he calls these people terrorists as well. So he obviously throws that term around quite.
I'd like to finish on a more positive note. So this is comment. This is from a couple of weeks ago, and this is from Mehmed Osman, who's a former member of the KRG Parliament, the Kurdistan Regional Government, which is the Kurdish region, the autonomous Kurdish region, semi-autonomous Kurdish region in northern Iraq. And he was talking about Kurdish people's leader, Abdullah Öcalan, and everything we talked about here, all this belligerence. It's interesting that not too long ago there was, albeit secretly, there were efforts to establish some kind of peace, and I can't help but think what might have happened if that path had been continued rather than being abandoned by the Turkish state. And he says. Öcalan has a project and says he can solve the problem, i.e. all this conflict, in 6 months. Turkey does not only leave him unanswered, but also isolates him. I believe that if negotiations are carried out with Öcalan, problems can be solved. If Öcalan is free and an agreement is reached through dialogue, peace will be achieved in the region.
I mean, look, there's no point in doing anything that we do if, of course, we don't have hope. But also, it's important to recognize that despite the Turkish state having the backing of NATO and therefore being a enormous NATO power itself, there is a mass resistance movement that Öcalan constitutes the ideological and philosophical architect of. So there is a movement of essentially millions who have been motivated and who have been, in some ways, many people say Öcalan created the resurrection of the Kurdish people at a time where the word Kurdish or Kurd was not uttered, particularly in Turkey. So in northern Kurdistan, Öcalan recreated a people, and therefore the rebirth of a people. And someone who has done that in a few decades, he achieved that obviously much earlier on, but like what has been achieved in 40 years by the movement that Öcalan is the architect of, it's essentially ludicrous of any power, anyone who will not take Öcalan's word for it when he says, I can solve this in 6 months. The person who is the architect of the Rojava Revolution, of the resurrection of the Kurdish people, particularly of Kurdish women, there is no shadow of a doubt that he can achieve peace in 6 months, and there is no other way that we think it would be. This will happen, and this needs to happen, and the only way to do that is Öcalan's freedom. It's not enough that the isolation of Öcalan is ended, but Öcalan's freedom so he can take his rightful place in equal negotiations with the Turkish state. This is the only way, not just for peace for the Kurdish people, but for the future of the entire region and therefore actually the world. We are globally essentially desperate for an alternative to the failures of capitalism and capitalist modernity. How much more capitalism fail us before we think to ourselves, okay, we need an alternative. And I think this is the crucial thing that Öcalan, in his conditions in isolation for the last 21 years, has been able to do, is that I'm not just going to critique this, but this is my alternative. And this is my alternative. This is my project in which the most marginalized and oppressed people of a nation and of a society and of a civilization take the very forefront of the liberation of everyone.
I think that is the perfect place to end this program. Thank you so much, Elif. That was a wonderful contribution. If you do want to support this content, please do like and subscribe. Follow us on Twitter @Öcalan3. If you want to directly support the creation of this content, please go to our Patreon page and consider donating as little as £1 a month. Or, like we said, if you want to become part of this campaign, help to shape its future as a trade unionist, please encourage your branch or meeting or committee or district or region to affiliate, and you can do that by going to www.freedomforöcalan.org. We'll put all the links to the news stories that we discussed in this program in the description. Elif, thank you again for joining me, and hopefully we'll see you again very, very soon.
Thank you very much, Matt, and of course all the best for the episodes to come.